Every studies about the climate change point that agriculture should, in this kind of climate, focus on better products and not mass production products, because in just a few years it will not be possible to make them without irrigation, and then maybe in 50 or 70 years it will be impossible to make them at all.
That was Renato Neves, head of viticulture at Haddad dos Servas. The environmental pillar of sustainability in Alentejo has some key challenges that we have already explored in other episodes. If you haven't already, please do also download the ebook that accompanies this series. I've divided this episode into key sections, including water, curating the landscape with human intervention, regenerative practices, grape variety selection, and agroforestry. Let's start with water. Professor Francisco Ferreira in Lisbon succinctly explains the main challenges facing the region.
Within the Mediterranean area, the Iberian Peninsula is definitely one of the areas where we will suffer the most with global warming and the consequences of climate change. And that runs from extreme meteorological events like flooding, but also heat waves. And we still have an issue with droughts that are becoming more intense and very local. For instance, in the Alentejo in the south, we're still lacking a lot of water in the large reservoirs that support agricultural practices and also drinking water. Agriculture in Portugal takes 70% of our water, both surface and groundwater, and we lose 40% of that water from the extraction point to the distribution point.
When we talk about nature, we often have our own views of what comprises a natural landscape. In so many cases, we would be surprised to find that humans at some point in time have curated the very landscape we perceive as natural. The creation of the Alqueva lake and dam that sprawls out across the Spanish and Portuguese border has been instrumental in reviving modern agriculture and, by extension, modern life in Alentejo. Underground pipes connected to pumping systems transport water for hundreds of kilometers around the region, where it can be connected for uses such as irrigation. With rainfall becoming more sparse with climate change, every drop of water has to be managed carefully. At Paco de Conde, Pedro Schmidt looks across the broad landscape of their estate, saying,
we have about 20 dams in this state so that we can keep water and we can keep on irrigating and try to help a little bit the crops. But the medium temperatures getting higher, that's a problem. And that's something that we need to be aware of and to try and do different way of working in the fields so that we can help the crops as much as possible.
At João Portugal Ramos, the land is shaped to capture the water into lakes, just like at Paso de Conde. João Portugal Ramos Jr. elaborates.
This water here, besides the water from the rain, we are pumping water with a solar panel system, I would say 3 kilometers from here. And that water is draining from the city. So it's water treated by the city municipality, and we put it here to irrigate these vineyards as well. We are using urban and industrial waters to irrigate our vineyards.
Curation of the land utilizes a technique called Keyline, where the topography is shaped to provide water drainage that passes through the vine rows. Helena Manuel at Haddad dos Lagos explains it to me here.
Our soils are very hard to work. They compact a lot. So all the water that comes from irrigation or from rain easily goes out and increases erosion. So with Keyline, we build a system parallel to the vineyards, like channels of water to allow the water to infiltrate into the soil, to retain more water. So basically it's that technique that we use in parallel lines to the vineyard. And on the newest vineyards that we have planted last year, we used the topography. So we planted in parallel lines of the curve lines. With that, we also create swales. And also with the Keyline, we allow that naturally the water stays there and infiltrates naturally and feeds the plants.
With all this landscape sculpting going on, it is easy to imagine that nature and biodiversity are being bullied into submission. But much to my amazement, where work has been carefully executed, nature is thriving. The initial impact of the Alqueva Dam itself has started to benefit biodiversity by providing the water necessary for plants to grow and ecosystems to thrive. At João Portugal Ramos, he points to birds nesting around the artificial lake, birds whose presence until recently was rare in Alentejo. There are even reports of the Iberian lynx, an indigenous wildcat, returning to the region. At Quinta de Carmo near Borba, I stood with Rui Vieira and João Chamorro, who managed the estate, looking out over the lake at the bottom of the schist hill. In the heat of 2023, the lake almost ran below what was needed to support the estate. They are now in the process of creating a second dam to be located alongside the first. Where we are standing will be the future vineyard, raised up from the soil removed to create the artificial lake. The project seems colossal to my mind, but the engineers and ecologists are planning its careful execution. The more water stored, the more water to support local biodiversity, and we hope a climate-resilient boost to the local economy. At the same time as this, they're planning a glamping site deep within the ancient cork forest. Careful integration is critical. During my first visit to Casa Clara in 2021, we looked out across a new project in the making. The vast sweep of exposed soils being moved around by large diggers underscored the size of the project. In the background, the sedate presence of a cork forest crested the horizon. On my return in 2024, the vines were thriving. The landscape has been transformed so that the terraces are orientated to the north to reduce sunlight exposure and optimized for water capture. Between the vine rows, cover crops of wild flowers and tough grasses prosper. Gazing around with the cork trees on the far hill and a large body of water below, we can only surmise that the ecosystem is thriving.
If we can manage the water that it's so scarce, the good management of the soil in order to maintain the humidity, the slopes turn to north, help us make that management of the good phenolic maturation.
The transformation is striking. Creating living landscapes is not just about enabling farming. The water pathways into the soils play a huge role in restoring the hydrological cycle, and instead of soils losing moisture directly, the system comes closer to being regulated by the plants, and as such, mirroring a truly natural system. At Haddad de Groche, vineyard manager Luis Constantino shows me several different vineyard plots at different stages of development. In one field where the vines are thick with foliage in the early summer sun, he draws my attention to the thickness of the decaying mulch beneath our feet. Its rugged thatch creates a thick, carpet-like layer, protecting the soil beneath from the harsh heat of the summer sun.
So we have a carpet, and the soil is protected from the direct sun, and all these leaves in the back will be the next organic matter input that we're gonna have in the future. We have lots of studies. That means we can protect the soil and down the temperature more than 10 degrees. Really significant.
On a previous visit to Alentejo some years ago, I learned how the cork oak trees, or Quercus suber in Latin, are a keystone species that supports biodiversity, a healthy signal that the ecosystem is in good health. As we move on, he shows me a vineyard that was in its infant stages when I visited 3 years previously. These vines are not supported by trellis wires, but instead are growing straight upwards, like lollipops. The grape varieties are all mixed, traditional Portuguese, and Luis enthuses about their potential.
We believe that could be the future of viticulture in our region. We're gonna plant autochthonous varieties at low formation and field blend. That means they're gonna protect themselves, and at the end of the day, the quality of that will be very, very good. We just had the first harvest last year, and it is very interesting, the blend of varieties. And it's also trying to get back what is natural in the nature. There's different species, not only one species in a field. This different species is still a vine, but different individuals from different varieties just trying to connect to each other. And at the end of the day, we are just very proud of this project.
Another estate, Coeros, is practicing regenerative techniques to repair and protect soils. There is a striking innovation and experimentation taking place. Vineyard manager João Ropacero took us to a building on the estate where they are fermenting soils to be used as a soil additive. The objective is to boost the living organic carbon and increase the capacity for water retention in the soils.
We are starting to work with our microorganisms. We went to the forest and grab a little piece of soil with organic matter. Then we make fermentation with organic molasses and a little bit of weed. And we do fermentation of 13 days, anaerobic fermentation. And then we use that moist to do some tea and apply in the soil.
At Herdad de Servas, big changes have been underway. On our tour with head of viticulture Renato Neves, he says,
in 2022 in December, we saw 23% of the rainfall of the entire hydrologic year raining in just 2 days. So we need to have our soils ready for it to infiltrate, to absorb that water, and organic matter is the way to keep that water in our crops.
The winery has vines dating back to the 1950s, but has been converting to ecological friendly methods of production. 80% of the vineyards here are dry farmed, and the remaining 20% are irrigated very carefully. He says that the soils were in very poor condition from so many years of tilling. Since working and monitoring their regenerative efforts for the last 5 years, he says,
it all ends in the connectivity between the vines and the soil. If you have a more aggressive microbiome, you will have more interaction between the vine roots and the soil. And that partnership, it's about changing nutrients of plants giving sugars and the microbes giving nutrients back to the vine. It will help the vine to be more comfortable in nutrition.
The dedication of the team is not without reward.
We can see in our wines, the fruit is more expressive, more vibrant. The wines can conserve better because they are more dense in the secondary metabolites, in tannins, in anthocyanins, in other compounds.
Just down the road from Servas is the ancient Herdad de Mushau, where Ian Reynolds Richardson is working to get back to where they were before the revolution. Mushau wines are famous for their long aging times, and that characteristic is apparent in every aspect of the vineyard. With climate in a flux, the approach here is very much hands-on learning. As we head out after lunch into the vines, Ian says,
we're struggling perhaps with only one thing, because we have to find our three-way balance in our picking time. So it's not just acids and sugars. We're having to look at how mature the stems are, how lignified the actual stems, and how obviously evolved the elagitannins are once the wine's made and so on, because you get a lot of sappiness if you pick too soon. But with climate change, we're finding those imbalances perhaps happening a little bit more often than we'd like to.
Yeah.
So we're always having to play around with that. We always find that stemminess that you've mentioned, in the right proportions, it does give a freshness to our wines, and that is quite important in a hot climate like ours. And it's very much something that's referenced by a lot of people who come here, journalists who are fans of Mushau. Yeah.
One of the most exciting aspects of tasting wine in Alentejo is the expression of different grape varieties. When Helena Ferreira from Adega Borba expresses her worry that wine drinkers don't know the names of these grapes, I can't help thinking that Portugal's rich patrimony of grape varieties is one of the most exciting prospects for wine lovers. Portugal has over 250 native grape varieties, making it one of the most diverse viticultural countries in the world. Finding grape varieties among them that are suited to different aspects of climate adaptability makes this a fantastically valuable resource for experimentation. It is very well encapsulated in this quote from Luis Patral at Coeros.
And now we are going back to our past, looking for indigenous varieties that were very well adapted to this climate. So bigger berries, low alcohol, more acidity, in order to don't do this kind of additions in our winery.
Foreign varieties do still offer a great deal to the region's viticultural profile. Many producers still work with Syrah, for example. Another variety that was originally from France but has found its home in Alentejo is Alicante Bouschet, As Pedro Schmidt from Pacho de Conde says,
because the Alicante Bouschet, for instance, in France, they don't like Alicante Bouschet. It's not so valorized grape as we have here in Alentejo. For us, Alicante Bouschet, it's ours.
At Malhadinha Nova, we saw Alvarinho grapes thriving under the cover of copious leaves in the hot sun, a long way from where we might expect to see Alvarinho in the more wet and humid Vinho Verde region in the north. Candeeira wines are producing an encruzado, the pearl of the Dow region's white varieties. At Caçarelvas, we taste a number of single variety wines that show off the unique profiles of varieties. At Herdade de Rochim, the revival of the Roman clay pots called Talia goes hand in hand with indigenous grape varieties that have been sidelined in recent times. Bruno Gomes from Rochim enthuses about these unusual varieties almost entirely unheard of outside of Portugal.
And it was like a purpose to come to the old vines, or else you're going to lose all that patrimony that you have from old vines, from old grapes. Right now, like Moreto, Mantiudo, Rabo de Ovelha, Perrum, Tinta Grossa were grapes that the people don't care so much. And right now, coming again to the older fields or old vines, everyone uses again that grapes.
Antelvache is an autochthonous variety that is exciting producers and tasters alike. At Quinta de Peral, they have 13 hectares of 60-year-old Antelvache vines, twisting in incomplete rows with 600-year-old olive trees standing meditatively among them. Winemaker Luis Lau says,
on the Antelvache of the old vineyards, we have a very good complexity. We talk complexity of the red wines, but the white wines, they have it. And on the old wines, we have more and a very good acidity. You don't feel the acidity on the mouth, but you feel the freshness, some kind of mineral flavors, and you feel it on the wine.
At Vita Preta, experimentation is key. Tasting the wines is an exploration of flavors, and the beautiful old winery, believed to be the oldest in Évora, represents a revival of a historic community building in Alentejo's main city. Winemaker Leonor Frazao emphasizes experimentation and the attitude to creating wines.
Sometimes we launch like an experiment, like something we try different on this harvest, and then we think it was very cool, we bottle it, we put it on the market, and then it's a big success, and then, oh yeah, but I only have 2,000 bottles, what I'm going to do now? And then we have to make it the year later bigger and bigger. And I think there's a big community that really loves what we are making and understands that we are making stuff in different ways.
With the determination that we see in Alentejo to coexist with the natural environment, despite the prospect of a challenging climate ahead, it is fascinating to see how new vineyards are being planted that venture from the fields into the wilds. Leonor Frazao, winemaker at Vita Preta, says,
we started to plant this vineyard in 2017, and basically we didn't take out anything from the landscape. So we left all the trees that you can see, and we plant our vineyards in the places where we can plant our vineyards, where we have space to fit our vineyards. And sometimes we have a tree in the middle of a plot or a couple of stones.
Herdade do Esborao have long been innovators in sustainable practices. It was inspiring to see the seriousness with which they approach agroforestry techniques in viticulture.
Once you put there the vineyards in balance with this area or immersed in this area, I believe that you are interfering less with the ecosystem. And I'm saying that you have already some trees that are keeping the water, restoring the humidity, connecting with the cover crops that you also have, attracting some bugs, insects that are controlling the pests, retaining also some water in the soil too. And also, a very important point related with the trees is controlling the wind pattern. I believe you are creating conditions that will be much better for viticulture.
It is the combination of these philosophies and actions, coupled with the progress that emerges under the spectre of existential challenges, that makes certified producers within the WASP program leaders in shaping a sustainable future. I will leave you now with Luis Patrao and his philosophy for tackling sustainability.
We are trying to figure out what we can get from forests in order to help our vines, or how our vines could help our nuts. I think this is how we work differently. Okay, we try to figure out the best things from each crop, from each culture, in order to improve the whole system. I think now in regenerative viticulture or agriculture or farming, that whatever you want to call it, I think we found the solution that we want.
One hope I have is that plants, they are living beings, so they learn. And one thing I saw it from these 5 years past with dryness, I think they learned to live with it. So they are more resilient now than they were 5 years ago. So when we were talking about new varieties, more adapted, I believe those plants here, they are the variety that are more susceptible to live here. A genetical adaptation